this is Zach Rubin, and I'm joined today with Jenny Blake, who will be speaking about how to pivot strategically into your next opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenny.
Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled and honored to be here.
Great. I'll give a little bit of background information for our webinar today, and then give Jenny a quick introduction and really let her take it away. There will be time for questions. We know that that's really important with everything going on with COVID-19 and a lot of concerns about what the future holds and people needing to pivot. So please click on the Ask a Question button below the video throughout the presentation and ask your questions there. And we'll get to most of those at the end of the presentation. And then you can also feel free to check out the link to Jenny's book on how to pivot in the resources section of the page. I'll give a quick introduction. Jenny Blake is the founder of Pivot Method, a growth strategy company that helps forward-thinking individuals and organizations map what's next through scalable pivot programs. She is an international keynote speaker and the author of Pivot, The Only Move That Matters Is Your Next One, which is the topic of our webinar today. And Jenny also hosts the popular Pivot podcast, which Entrepreneur selected as one of the top 20 female-hosted business podcasts. And a little more background, after 2 years at a technology startup in Silicon Valley, followed by 5 years at Google in training and career development, Jenny moved to New York City in 2011, where she began running her own consulting business and helping innovative organizations like Google and Microsoft incorporate the Pivot method into their global career development and manager training programs. And Jenny's motto, which I love, is if change is the only constant, let's get better at it. I'll let Jenny take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Zach. And thank you to everybody for being here. I know that now we have an abundance of online activities that you could be attending, if not hitting all out screen fatigue. So I feel very thankful to have you here live, or maybe you'll be watching the recording. Hello to those of you in the future. That bio, I feel like all of our bios will need to have. And then in 2020, Jenny pivoted, or shall we say, we all have gotten pivoted by this pandemic. The book came out in 2016, as Zach mentioned. And although I had this sense at the time that every time I hit a career plateau or a pivot point, it felt like a crisis, I had no idea what was going to come in 2020, where the entire planet has hit pause. It's as if we are shaking up a snow globe and the little snow particles haven't landed yet. If nothing else, you are all getting a black belt in pivoting as we speak. You've already probably adapted in such important ways, and each of you, every single one of us, is being asked to grow and rise during this time. I'm here, and what I'll share is what I share in the book, the 4 stages of the pivot method. Because what I found is that while startups often talk about pivoting, and the term sort of rose in popularity through the tech world, Silicon Valley is often plan B. And even when people say pivot, or Ross and Friends, pivot, we have to pivot. There's that meme, that clip with the couch, try to turn the corner of a stairwell, which we've all probably had that experience. It's hard to know how. And often pivots are a product of our success. In this case, you're all probably coming at this from such a different place. And in fact, we're being asked to pivot daily. So as Zach mentioned, one of my mottos that I adopted while working on this book, if change is the only constant, let's get better at it. My hope is that by the end of this session today, you feel more equipped to deal with the daily, if not hourly, changes that are coming your way, and that you can look for small experiments and opportunities. Before I jump into the actual slides, take a moment to check in with yourself. Maybe even take a big deep breath and give a loud audible exhale. Just kind of shake off anything that you're bringing in from your week, from your weekend, worries about the future, thoughts about the past, and see if you can arrive here now. How are you doing today? How are you doing right now? Think about how you have already adapted. So depending when the pandemic really started to impact your area, when you were asked to shelter at home, there's no question that you've already had to adapt in massive ways. So think about, how have you already adapted? And along similar lines, how are you growing? How is this time shaping you? What are you learning? How are you growing on a personal level and on a professional level? We're going to talk about pivot as both a mindset and a method. Again, when startups talk about pivoting, it's often that something's going wrong. But for so many of us, pivot is the new plan A. And what that means is that we're not going to wait until these big dramatic moments, although this certainly happened for so many during this time. Pivot as the new plan A means that, especially now, we can follow almost a continuous process. The mindset is saying, how am I adapting? How am I growing? What am I being called to do? And even how am I being called to serve during this time? It's also an opportunity for us to learn steps that will help accelerate your ability to adapt to these changes. One of my favorite quotes is from Heraclitus. He says, "No person ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and they're not the same person." This is true now more than ever. We every day brings something different and nobody can predict the future. Nobody has the answers about what the future is going to look like. So if you feel overwhelmed and uncertain and anxious and afraid, you're not alone. And part of what we're being asked to do is recognize the underlying nature of reality, which is that every single day we wake up and we're a day older. We're a day more tired or a day more rested. If we work in an organization, the company might change on a daily basis. The market changes, our customers change, our team members change. So even when we think times are, quote, normal, we're still never stepping in the same river twice. Time keeps moving. We keep flowing with the currents of our lives and our work. And so this is an opportunity to place your awareness on what is steady, what can you double down on and lean on during times of change, and then how can you better adapt. That's the pivot as a mindset piece, and accept that you always have a choice in how you respond to those changes. You've probably heard the term high net worth. These are people who have accumulated a lot of financial resources in their lifetime. The people that I wrote Pivot for, and certainly all of you here, I would consider you high net growth. You're not just asking, how much am I earning, but what am I learning? How am I growing? And that's going to be really important to you, whether you're trying to navigate a coronavirus crisis like the one that we're in, or you're working inside of a company, or you're looking for work. You're going to be asking not just, is this, am I earning enough to make this worth it? But am I going to learn and grow from this opportunity? When those needs for growth are being met, then we turn toward impact. So not just am I learning and am I growing, but am I making an impact? And if you're not, there will come a point where you naturally look to pivot. So if you don't feel that you're growing and you don't feel that you're making an impact, that's usually when you might start getting restless and start looking at what's next. Whenever we consider any next step or any project, whether it's a project within a company, it's a personal creative project, or next steps in, let's say, even job searching, or our overall career picture. Stagnation zone is when you're actively bored. You're not learning, you're not growing, you're not making an impact, and you really can't stay in that state much longer. Comfort zone is, it's fine, works fine, all's well, not particularly challenged, but maybe you're going through a lot of changes in your personal life, or you're starting a family, moving across the country, and you want it to be in your comfort zone professionally. The optimal range for change is your stretch zone. That's where change feels, or any one next step feels edgy, but exciting. You have adrenaline pumping, you're excited, you feel yourself stretching and growing. If you try to take one next step or frame your next career, I call them sometimes career conundrums, in too vague of terms, you'll hit your panic zone. And that's where you feel just paralyzed. You're not doing anything. Analysis paralysis, compare and despair. Panic zone is you're frozen and everything feels overwhelming and it feels very uncertain and challenging and you're just not sure what to do. You're almost spinning. when this pandemic hit, for so many of us, myself included, by the way, in the month of March, my business, we lost 90% of our revenue. So, of course, I was scrambling along with so many of you trying to figure out, okay, what's next? Where do we go from here? So, the pandemic alone is putting so many people in our stretch zone, if not your panic zone. And certainly when it all started going down, there were probably many moments of panic of the sky is falling. What are we supposed to do here? And then slowly over time, we adjust. For some of you, if you were used to going into an office and now you're working from home, well, maybe you weren't used to working from home, and that alone put you in your stretch zone. Not to mention whatever projects you were taking on or the actual work itself that you were trying to get done. Or you have kids at home. I mean, we have so many different scenarios that people are experiencing right now. So one thing I'll say is that give yourself some permission to have a slightly different risk tolerance and threshold and capacity to not just take on new work and projects, but be as productive as you might otherwise be if times were quote normal again, which we're all creating and unfolding the new normal as we speak. The new normal, there is no new normal. It's going to be different every day for a long time. I really don't see this as somehow the whole planet, we're going to flip some switch and everything just clicks back into place. There's really no bouncing back. I heard this on a podcast the other day. It's more about bouncing forward. And that's what we're all being asked to do. I define a career pivot as a methodical shift in a new related direction based on a foundation of your strengths and what is already working. It's important to understand that not all pivots are big dramatic moves. Again, many of you may have gotten pivoted during this time. Maybe you were laid off or furloughed, or a job that you were just about to land didn't come through. Or you run your own business like me and you're being asked to pivot your clients or your revenue streams, your overall pivot portfolio. But sometimes pivots are smaller than that. And it's important to recognize that you can apply the pivot method and this change framework within the role that you have. So within the structure of what you're already doing, you can look at what's working. And instead of focusing on what you don't want, what you don't know, what you don't have, if you look at what's working, that will then catapult you into a new related direction, idea, or project. Think about a recent pivot, and I find it helpful to reverse engineer. So you've all already pivoted many times. You may or may not have used that word. It's certainly becoming more and more popular in our zeitgeist nowadays. We hear the word pivot. I hear it at least almost every day, but maybe my antenna are tuned because I wrote the book. Um, I'll give you an example. So, when I was working at the startup, as Zach mentioned, one of my many hats, I was a marketing assistant, webmaster, and office manager. And one of my jobs was managing our Google AdWords accounts. I pivoted to Google when I hit a plateau at the startup. I ended up applying to Google as an AdWords product trainer. So, instead of being a customer of the product, I became a trainer teaching new hires at Google how to support the AdWords product. And that was the application of a skill that I had been building. You can think about apps on your phone. Your phone represents your education and your upbringing. It's your base operating system. And then you get to download apps for different skills, interests, education, and even side projects. So think about the apps that have helped you make pivots large and small in your past, or maybe even that you're applying right now during this time. Again, in a way, I was going to say we're all downloading an app right now, just how to respond during a pandemic, but it's more like an overall OS upgrade. We are upgrading our entire operating system right now of how do we deal with change on such a massive scale. Let's get into the 4 stages of the pivot method. The first stage is plant. So this came to me actually, I left Google 2011, as Zach mentioned, and I had hit plateaus internally at Google. I often felt sort of crazy. What's wrong with me? I must be one of those entitled millennials that the media keeps talking about. Why can't I just be happy? Google's supposed to be the Disneyland of companies, the holy grail. And I felt really bad when I would hit a plateau and was ready for something more. I was able to pivot internally from AdWords product trainer to career development workshops, both launching a global coaching program and training managers and directors how to serve as coaches within the organization. The only reason I was able to land that role internally was that I had done coach training on nights and weekends in 2008, and I joined a small 10% team. When I left Google, I continued doing career related coaching, training, and speaking, but this time on my own. And it wasn't until 2 years after leaving Google when I started to wonder what's next. And this time I no longer had a paycheck to fund the exploration. So it created a lot more stress. I was self-employed at that point. I was worried that all my biggest business fears would come true and I'd have to pack everything up, leave New York, and go find another full-time job, which is just not what I felt was calling to me at that time. My big aha moment and what sparked the pivot method and the book was realizing that I had to think more like a basketball player. When a basketball player stops dribbling, one foot is planted. And that's their foundation, their strength, their stability. And then their pivot foot can scan for passing options. So I had been running around the basketball courts like a crazy person, just not grounded in anything. My first book, Life After College, had come out in 2011, but I didn't want to talk about life after college for the next 5 or 10 or 30 years of my career. So it wasn't until I said, what is my plant foot? What is already working? That then I can shift methodically. And that realization saved my business. I ended up earning 3 times as much by the end of that year than I had in the 2 years prior. So that's where we start with the pivot method is this plant stage is about 2 things. What's working and what does success look like? Usually I recommend looking at what's working, what are you already great at, what are your biggest strengths? And then I say about 1 year out, depending on your current circumstances, especially with so much changing right now, I encourage you to hold 2 visions in your mind. Maybe one for 1 month from now, if you're really on rocky ground, or 3 months from now, something that's short term enough to adapt to even what's being asked of us from our various state governments about sheltering at home and how we interact with the world. So maybe you have a 1 month or 3 month vision and a 1 year vision. But don't worry about planning too much farther out than that. There's a reason that the subtitle of the book is The Only Move That Matters is Your Next One. I believe that the where do you see yourself in 5 years question is completely obsolete. The best advice I heard was answer that question by sharing how you see yourself learning and growing. But who can know? We cannot know the answer to that anymore. We can barely know a year at this point. I mean, that would even be very ambitious. So take the pressure off that you have to have your whole career and all your next steps completely mapped out. Just focus on what is already working. What do you already enjoy the most? What are you already good at? What do you often recognize for? And what does success look like? Even vaguely. You don't have to have all the specifics or know the whole how just yet. One thing that's important to note when you think about your strengths is we often think of things we're good at, areas of competence, things like that we get rewarded for or we get taught in our education, which is a little different than areas that energize you, your intrinsic motivators, the activities that just light you up and you look forward to. You can't wait to dive into them. This intersection represents our true strengths. So I encourage you when you think about what's working for that plant stage, don't just focus on what you're good at sort of on paper. Look at what really lights you up, what energizes you the most. I'm going to share the reflection questions with you here, but we'll keep moving just so that we open up more time for Q&A. Please know that sometimes I'll spend a month or more with coaching clients on each of these 4 pivot stages. So what I recommend is that you rewatch this recording and pause. Actually take out a pen and paper, those good old analog devices, and give yourself 10 minutes per stage, even better, an hour or a week at a time, and go through each of the 4 stages and really deeply reflect. Because the more time you spend on the plant reflection, the more efficient and effective you'll be at actually figuring out what next steps to take. So when you reflect on the plant stage, ask yourself what energizes you most, what's working best right now, even if it's a small percentage, and what does success look like 1 year from now, as well as something shorter term that represents the unique circumstances that we all find ourselves in. The second stage of the pivot method is scan. So in this, we're now bridging the gap. Think about, to switch metaphors, Google Maps. You are here and you put in your destination point. You generally want to end up here, or this is where you're trying to go. Only once you have those 2 points, those 2 brackets, does it make sense to start looking at modes of transportation, potential roadblocks, how long or short each route is going to take. Scanning is about looking for people, skills, and projects related to what you came up with in the plant stage. One of the biggest mistakes that most pivoters make is jumping to scan too early. Maybe you got pivoted and you're sort of freaking out. Bye, this change has just happened. What's out there? Who can I talk to? What job boards can I look at? What do I do? But when we do that, you're not grounded in your own strengths and interests and what success looks like. So it's really important that when you start scanning for people, skills, and projects, it's based on what you came up with in the plant stage. And by the way, the 3-month, 1 month, or 1 year vision, I'll share resources at the end. I created an ideal day Mad Lib that for me really helps get those creative juices flowing on that front. Part of looking at your vision, whether 1 month or 1 year, is asking, how are you most excited to grow? What would you like to become an expert at? What kind of impact do you want to make 1 month or 1 year from now? If you were to receive an award or a glowing thank you note, what would it be for? So it's less about, oh, I want to have a job at XYZ company doing these activities. I mean, it could be that specific if that's really calling to you, but it can be broad. Just a vision means, how do you see yourself in your day to day? What types of projects, what types of people would you be happy to be surrounded by? And that's all you need to know at that point in the process. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote the seminal book on flow, and research shows that when we're in a flow state, we are 5 times more productive, and it also feels almost like a state of ecstatic bliss. When you're scanning for skills and projects that would help you through your pivot, or the big secret is we're always pivoting. Pivoting is much more continuous than just one finite moment in time. Csikszentmihalyi presents this access that we find a flow state at just the right amount of skill and just the right amount of challenge. If we have too much skill and not enough challenge, you might find yourself bored. And certainly, I'm sure some of you can look back on times where that was the case. If you have too much challenge and not enough skill to meet that challenge, you might feel anxiety. So, for example, depending how you've been affected during this pandemic, you might already be feeling anxiety because I've never had to deal with something like this, or I've never had to try to take steps forward during such an uncertain time, not knowing how and when the economy is going to bounce back. Or for many of you who are recent grads, I think it's really too bad that the media is so focused on, oh, graduates who graduate during an economic recession earn less for the rest of their career. Shake that off right now. That does not have to be you. And if you tell yourself that story and that, of course, that's going to create anxiety and it's going to be disempowering for you in the long run. So to that, I always say, be willing to be the exception and look for places where you already have skill, where you are excited to develop skills, and look for what skills you might need to meet a certain challenge or one of the bigger challenges that you're facing at the moment. When you take time to reflect for this stage, for the people section, consider who you admire. Who can you talk to? Who can you learn from afar? Maybe it's podcaster, author, webinars like this one. Who are some people who have already served as mentors in your life? And who are some of your friend-tors, peers, friends, people at your level who you can create mastermind groups with or accountability? And when it comes to skills, based on what you came up with in the plant stage, think about what skills interest you. What would you be most excited to learn? And also, what skills would be most beneficial? So maybe during this time, you're being asked to develop the skill of navigating change or navigating uncertainty, or you're realizing that professionally speaking, there would be a certain set of skills that would benefit you greatly to develop. I also encourage you to think about skills that seem random. I've seen a lot of articles of people making bread during this time, or learning how to knit, or learning how to make face masks. That's a skill. What other skills do you, or what in your life do you feel just curious about and you don't even know why? So, if you're somebody who listens to podcasts, what episode topics are you most excited about when you see come into your feed? I even have a theory that the shows that we binge watch tell us something about our careers, the qualities of that show or the psychology of the characters, that there's nuggets that we can extract that would give you clues toward what you're curious about and skills or interests that you have that you could develop further, or existing strengths that you can double down on. The third stage of the pivot method is pilots. This is where things start to get fun because in plant and scan, you're largely in your own mind. During the pilot stage, you get out there, you start testing ideas. In the basketball metaphor, this would be like starting to pass the ball around the court, seeing where you have the best opportunity to make a shot. Another metaphor I like for the pilot stage is racehorses at the Kentucky Derby. So many people put pressure on themselves to solve their pivot as if it's this cut and dried thing or a linear process, and it's not. I'll tell you right now, because I've encountered thousands of people since the book came out. You cannot know the answers up front. And if you wait to start taking action until you have the answer, you'll be waiting for a long time. So, like racehorses at the Kentucky Derby, your job is to line up the horses or your pilots, small experiments at the starting gate, lift the gates and say, go. Your pilots or these racehorses will show you which ones start to take on momentum of their own. A good pilot, and think of a pilot as a test, a small experiment. Like a pilot episode of a TV show helps the network determine if they should pick up the full series. Consider 3 E's. Do you enjoy this area? Can you become an expert at it? And is there room to expand? I gave you the example that when I was at Google, I started a 10% team to develop drop-in coaching. I wanted that to be democratized, available to any Googler at no outside cost, and where they wouldn't need to have approval from their manager, because up till that point, you needed to get manager approval and spend hundreds of dollars an hour just to get an external coach. That 10% project enabled me that when the career development team was created a year later, the career dev team didn't even exist when I started that project. But a year later, when a team was created, I was able to get the one open role. Another example on the project side, when I got the book deal for Pivot in 2014, I decided, why don't I record the interviews with experts? Because I might as well release them publicly and have this nice little side project to accompany the book. I started very scrappy. I just recorded with my iPhone headphones and uploaded them to SoundCloud. I even used to say, welcome to the Pivot Podcast, everybody. I don't have any fancy intro and outro music, but here we go. So I didn't know how. Slowly but surely, I taught myself GarageBand. By the time the book came out 2 years later in 2016, the podcast was my favorite activity that I did in my entire business. And to this day, that remains true. Yesterday, I had 3 interviews back to back, and I left the day feeling on fire. I actually felt that I was playing hooky on the rest of my business by spending that time. Those are the signals that it's a truly energizing activity. And so I learned early on with my podcast experiment. Did I enjoy it? Yes. Could I become better at things like audio editing and interviewing and presence? Yes, I could. And yes, I wanted to. It's important that a pilot also indicate, do you even want to grow your expertise in that area? And then the third area was the room to expand, both in my business. Could I spend more time and resources on it? And is there room to expand in the marketplace? When the pandemic started, I pivoted to podcasting daily. So since mid-March, I felt this urge that so much is changing. Pivot is all about change, that the Pivot podcast just started doing it daily. I don't know how long it will last, but I'm testing now again. So you can see how it goes in cycles. I'm testing, do I enjoy daily? Can I get better at all our systems? Because it is a lot of work. And is there room to expand? Is this naturally expanding my pivot portfolio? So as you consider, really for this area, when you reflect, think about tiny experiments. The ones I've mentioned are even bigger. Just attending a session like this one is an experiment in itself. You're thinking, what is pivot? What is this all about? And you took a risk to come here, a risk with your time, your effort, your energy. What are some experiments you could run? I'm going to even say in the next week and the next month, because so much will change from week to week, and even in the next 6 months. This is a good moment to reconnect with your vision of, again, not exactly, you still don't need to know exactly how you're going to get there, but what experiments would help you work toward that vision of how you want to learn and grow and make an impact. And if they feel big, if any of these experiments feel too big, make them smaller. I'm not a fan of the personal development mantra, go big or go home. I say go tiny. Go tiny, tiny, tinier until you feel comfortable, until you feel energized by whatever next steps you're going to try. The fourth and final stage is launch. This is where you go all in on a new direction. But there's also a little L launch, which is after you cycle through plant, scan, pilot, you can ask yourself, what one or two next steps can I come up with after reflecting on each of the previous three stages? Now, sometimes we get launched, this launch moment. Think about maybe you launch your own business or you move to a completely different department at the company you work for, or we were all kind of launched into working from home. I mean, I've been doing it for 9 years, but for many people, that was a launch. It's like you suddenly go from one thing to the next, and it does feel like this all-in moment. Twitter just launched that employees can work from home forever if they'd like. That was a launch. That they've reduced risk by piloting and experimenting. And then sometimes there comes a point where you do make a decision to go all in on a new direction. Remember that this is a cycle. It's not a one and done linear process. So these 4 stages boil down to what's working, what does success look like, what's out there, what can I try? If you remember nothing else from this session, just remember this: what can I try? There's no way any one of us can know what's next or what the right thing to do is. So many industries are still being deeply impacted today, and none of us can know. So all we can do every single day is say, I don't know. I don't know the answer. And what can I try? So often, I think people feel alone in their anxiety and feeling, what if I have a lot of fear and anxiety and insecurity around pivoting? We all do. I did not write this book or launch my own business because I was so confident in my skills as an entrepreneur. Exactly the opposite. I never felt very resilient to change. And working through reverse engineering my own change process and the work I had done through coaching many people inside of Google and outside of it eventually led me here. But I still have fear. I still have insecurity. I still have anxiety. I just don't let them stop me from running those experiments, testing small things, and taking small steps. And I encourage you to think about, what if you didn't let your fear stop you? What can you try? I'd like to move to Q&A soon, but I always like to close out with these 3 questions. And you can ask yourself these 3 questions every week if you want to move your pivot planning forward. What's your biggest insight or aha? And you're welcome to share in the question/comment box as well. I'd love to know. And that helps all of us synthesize the learning too, by hearing it, seeing it written in different ways, or maybe it was nothing I said, it just sparked an idea or a connection for you. What's one small step you'll take in the next week? And what one next step would make the biggest impact? And I encourage you, don't be shy. If you're willing to share at least one of those next steps in the comments, I guarantee you're going to inspire so many people to think about, oh, that's a good idea. Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I'm going to do that too. And so even while we're doing Q&A over the second half of this session, please do share your feedback on these 3 areas. If you want to learn more, you can get a ton of free resources at pivotmethod.com/toolkit. And the ideal day exercise, the ideal day Mad Lib that I mentioned, is pivotmethod.com/ideal day. So I'm going to leave this up just for a moment. And if you listen to podcasts, it's called Pivot with Jenny Blake, wherever you listen to podcasts. So with that, I hope that was helpful. I would love to hear what's on your mind. I know we have some questions already starting to come in. And Zach, I'll let you navigate those for us.
Sure, Jenny. Thank you so much for going over all of that and the method. I think that's very helpful for everyone, especially with everything going on. One question that's already come up in a few different versions already is just any particular advice or thinking for people who are maybe in their 50s or even 60s who are looking for, who maybe they're out of work now, where they see that they're going to need to pivot, things are really changing in their careers, and they feel maybe that there's more of an emphasis on younger employees and how do they pivot after they maybe have already done it many times and are a little more, maybe it's just, are there specific things that make it that segment should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I get this question a lot actually. So you're not alone in wondering that. And I've had coaching clients who say straight up, ageism is real. It's a factor. I'm encountering it. I see it on people's faces, so I want to just acknowledge how challenging it can feel if you are at that point and you're not feeling the response that you do deserve at this point in your career where I think what's important is that you focus on how much you have to offer. And of course, you can't control how this like young, wily startup is who they're looking for. It's just the same way that millennials often get a bad rap in the media, get shamed and blamed for being entitled. It's like, maybe there's a small percentage who are actually entitled and terrible to work with. But what I find with the younger generation is they really want to learn and grow and make an impact. And so while there are going to be companies that are legitimately ageist, unfortunately, and you should never have to deal with that, stay focused on the incredible portfolio of skills, experiences, and network that you already have. And what I'm encouraging everybody of all ages right now is see how you can think about projects, not even necessarily a full-time role anywhere. I understand that you may need the income of a full-time role, and I certainly wouldn't discount that or encourage you. I wouldn't say like stop looking for that altogether, but you may find more success by saying, I'm really good in this area. I see a company or a small business where they have a problem I can solve. And the great news about those of you who are later in your career is you have such a body of knowledge and work and experience, and again, connections that you can leverage. Whereas for those who are younger and just starting out in their career, it's going to be really on you to be proactive about building skills and building those connections. Also, everyone's going to need to ask, and this is a time to really pause. We're all in a global pause and say, what skills do I need to freshen up on? So I know even executives in their late 60s who are saying, okay, well, I've been wanting to learn about big data and AI and these kind of newer technologies, and now's the time, and that they're in between roles. And so it is important to just look at, okay, are there aspects of technology, let's say, for example, that you might be resisting, and how can you take small steps toward learning? Like teaching my grandma how to use Zoom. She would have never agreed to that prior to all this happening, but now she knows how to use Zoom, and there's no going back. She knows. Same thing with my dad. Like it's been really rewarding to actually see people adopting new skills and technologies during this time that they might not otherwise have had the patience for, or might have told the story, well, I'm not good at that, and just left it at that.
Great, Jenny, thank you so much. And there are actually more questions coming in with that, sort of in that similar vein, so I certainly hope that helps a lot of the people listening. We have a question here from someone who's looking for advice on saying they're already in a secure profession, but they've become complacent, and they're concerned about sort of the long-term security of that. And what advice do you have for, basically you're in a good role, but it's not, you can see that it may not be there forever, but you also maybe are limited in some of the options within that role to keep trying new things.
Yeah, I mean, start by just getting clear on what aspects, if any, you do appreciate about the role. I've seen so many people pivot internally within their role and within the companies that they work for by identifying what they actually enjoy, what problems they enjoy solving, and what they're most excited to learn, how they're excited to learn and grow, and what challenges they would be excited to take on. And that alone could provide a helpful springboard for a conversation with your manager. Because often what happens is when we get complacent, often it's a sign of your success. You've outgrown the role that you have. So you're bored and you feel kind of stuck and stagnant. And part of the reason I wrote Pivot and the reason that the book has I call it a judgment neutral title, is that that's totally normal. When I was working at Google at that in 2006, when I started, put so much emphasis on hiring the best and the brightest. But then how do you keep them? When the best and the brightest start at entry level customer service roles, of course they're going to want to pivot a year later. Of course they're going to hit these plateaus and pivot points. And at that time, no one was talking about it. So people started to look outside the company. But I will tell you, often the most successful pivots that I see come from somebody saying, I'm feeling stagnant in the role that I have, but they initiate a conversation with their manager about how they're excited to grow. And working through these 4 stages, I know for sure can help you do that. And then your manager might not have an answer right in that moment, but they can then keep their antenna up for when something crosses their threshold that might be a fit. So instead of even putting pressure on your manager to solve it, you can just say, hey, I attended this workshop recently and I got really clear on the things that I'm best at and how I'm most excited to grow. I wanted to share that with you. And you may not have anything right now, but I want to keep my eyes open too. And I'd love if you wouldn't mind doing the same, of maybe there's a way I can jump in on this kind of project or do an experiment. And if you use that language of experiment, again, with project-based pivots, it just takes the pressure off of everybody involved. I mean, right now, it's going to be so hard. Although I never like to tell myself that story, it's going to be so hard. I always try to say, well, how could it be easy? How could it be fun? But let's imagine that full-time roles are more uncertain. How can you start to build relationships and get your foot in the door, again, internally with teams across the company, or if you're somebody who's unemployed and you're looking for employment? A full-time role is like jumping into marriage. So what I'm wondering is, how can we, again, I know it's not by choice for so many of you, but how can you break it down? Think of like dating, as just these small projects or experiments or smaller conversations that could lead to more work over time if that initial, let's say it's a 3-month engagement, goes well. Project-based engagement, not a romantic engagement.
Great. Jenny, here's a question I love, and I'm very curious for your thoughts on it. And it's, does fear mean that you should rethink the pivot you're about to make?
I just saw that one at the exact same time. So thank you for submitting, and Zach for highlighting it. Depends. For me, fear is always present on some level, although it certainly has gone down over the years. And the more that I'm experimenting, the less fear I have, just because the idea of something is often more scary than when we just start doing it. I would try to distinguish between what my friend Alexander Franzen calls nerve-sighted, like a nervous excitement fear, versus fear that feels more like a punch in your gut, a gut instinct that you're about to make the wrong move. And for a lot of people, the way that fear comes in, it might make you feel kind of sick, kind of like nauseous, where you might be making a choice based on shoulds. And so often when we make choices based on shoulds, I should take that job, I should like this, I should want this type of opportunity. Sometimes that has a fear or an anxiety or a worry that is legitimate, that is something within you telling you you feel almost allergic to that thing. But if the fear is that nervous excitement and it's more like a magnet, so let's think about a magnet. The magnet is either repulsing you, like, oh, every time I get closer to saying yes to that opportunity, oh, I just feel repulsed. The magnet pushes you away versus a magnet that's pulling you. So an excited fear is, I'm so scared to do this thing, but I feel this magnet pulling me forward and it's compelling me and I don't even know why. And that's the kind of fear that I would lead into. And then I would just ask myself, what next step is so tiny that I'm willing to take it anyway, in spite of my fear?
Jenny, thanks. I think the conversation about fear is very interesting in this context. So thank you for the person who asked that question also. Someone shared their biggest aha moment was that 5-year plans are obsolete. But then their question is, don't you need to think about the larger picture of what your career should look like?
I just had a conversation that will come out on the Pivot podcast shortly, soon. It'll be episode 215 on Steven Shapiro. He wrote a book called Goal-Free Living. And I also live in a largely goal-free way. I used to set a lot of goals, and it used to energize me to set goals and reach them and achieve them. And then there came a point where I was more interested in surrender, in leaning into the flow of life and work and seeing where it took me. And amazing things still happened, but I wasn't as specific in clarifying them. So what Stephen said when I asked him this question, especially about career and business, he said, just because you don't have goals doesn't mean that you have directionality. So he believes in directionality, that you can look at what is your differentiator, and how can that inform the directionality of your career. So the 5-year plan, even if you're within a company, a lot of earlier employees at Google would often want their manager to be able to tell them, here's exactly how you're going to progress. Here's exactly how you're going to get promoted. And that's just not possible, even when in the best of times. So certainly at times like this, I just don't know how you could even attempt a 5-year plan. But if you have a goal that's singing in your heart, like maybe the goal to write a book or the goal to create some kind of community service project or a social good organization. I mean, maybe you have some vision in your mind that you can hold loosely and move in the direction of that vision without attaching to the exact plan on how to get there. There's a beautiful, beautiful poem. Please, everybody, Google this. That's part of your homework from this session. David White, What to Remember Upon Waking. And in that poem, he says, what you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can plan is too small for you to live. So when you find yourself wanting to plan to create a source of comfort, to ease your anxiety about uncertainty, just think back that probably some of the best things that have happened to you in your life and your career are the ones that you didn't plan for.
Great, Jenny, thanks so much. We have a great comment here from Scott that I just want to read aloud. Sure. And he just shared that 2 years ago, he left a company where he'd worked for 10 years. He had a good salary and benefits, but didn't feel challenged. He was bored and didn't feel like he was making an impact. And he was scared because he felt that he was losing so much. And he used what he was good at and what he enjoyed doing and found a job that actually fit that description. And then just fast forward a few years, now he couldn't be happier. The current role has given him more exposure and challenges, and he feels like he's making an impact. And just his advice is for anyone out there who is scared to make a move, don't be scared. It's better to make a change based on your foundation and find out it wasn't the right move rather than never know. And just sharing that he didn't actually ask a question, but just wanted to share that with the group. So Scott, thank you for sharing. And I think that's, it obviously can work for people. So definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah, maybe in terms of another question for the webinar though, someone asked for the plant stage where you're kind of planting your flag in the ground of what you're going to stay with. Any recommended assessments for helping people to determine what that would be?
I love that you asked because yes, assessments are great. I'm an assessment junkie, maybe like some of you. I'm into all of it. Assessments, astrology, numerology. I mean, there's so much that can shed light on your personality. And there's a reason that personality types constantly go viral on the internet because we love to learn about ourselves. But more importantly than that, it can often give you language to put to your strengths. Because sometimes when we take a personality test, what's comforting is it almost tells us what we already know about ourselves, but it's like, aha, yes, I do like those things, or that does drain me. Clifton Strengths is a great one. That's a standby. That's one I definitely recommend. I love what a company called Helios, they offer us an assessment called Strength Scope, which really measures what energizes you and what drains you. As I shared earlier, that's where that slide comes from, actually. So more about the activities and how you respond to them rather than what you're good at on paper or not. There's so many good ones. I mean, you really can't go wrong. I think Enneagram, I'm a big fan of the Enneagram. Crazily enough, it's just 2 questions. If you want to take the quick self assessment, of course, there's Myers Briggs. It's up to you. How much energy do you have? If you have a lot of energy, take them all. If you want to prioritize, I would start with Clifton Strengths. Myers Briggs has a quicker version. When you hear people talk about introversion, extroversion, it often is rooted in Myers Briggs. And then there's all kinds of self assessments from people like Gretchen Rubin has the 4 types of, how you respond to challenge. You might find that helpful. Those are some places that I would start, but uh, like I said, I've done it all. I love astrology. I love numerology. I love getting readings from all kinds of different places that help round out. And it's not so much that anyone outside of you has the answers, but it's that that magnet we talked about will resonate, or certain things will just jump out at you or stick with you or be very memorable from a conversation like that or from an assessment that might present to you something that you knew deep down about yourself, but just couldn't put words to. So I think assessments are fantastic for when you're in that plant exploration stage.
Great, Jenny. Someone asked about the imposter syndrome, and I'm sure this has come up before, but that feeling that you're not really qualified for what you're maybe saying you are, even though you've spent some time kind of practicing or learning the new skills, but you don't maybe have a degree in that particular area that you're trying to get into, or all the qualifications that someone else might. Just any thoughts for overcoming that?
So and can you just clarify when you're maybe both, when you feel unqualified versus you are actually unqualified?
I think this is someone is maybe they could be qualified, but they're not they're qualified enough to maybe give a shot at doing a project or applying for a job or something like that, but they feel like they would need to do a lot more to be completely qualified. Okay. And if they were to get the role, they're worried maybe, or even if they did get a role, they feel like they're that like imposter syndrome idea of you're not you're kind of faking it until you make it, and you feel like even though you are doing a fine job, you feel like you're going to get found out essentially.
Well, on the subject of imposter syndrome, everyone has it. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. So many people I speak with have it. In fact, one time I did a panel. My friend is a vice president at a very large luxury brand. She's an incredible person. And she said when she got that VP role, which is the farthest she had gotten in her career at that point in terms of title, she said she had imposter syndrome. And I asked her in this panel, so I feel comfortable sharing it here too. I said, well, how long did that imposter syndrome last for you? She said, about 2 years. And everyone in the room kind of laughed and gave a sigh of relief because they thought, oh my gosh, well, even she had it for 2 years in this role until she really found her footing and found her momentum. It's so normal. Research does show that women are less likely to raise their hands for an opportunity until they feel 100% qualified, whereas men tend to think, I'm qualified enough, let me go for it. I'll let someone else decide, but I'm not going to count myself out. On this level, I encourage you to do 2 things. Where do you need to actually bolster your skills? Because I have mixed feelings about fake it till you make it. It's like, yes, sometimes, but don't be inauthentic or don't lie. It's how do you fake it till you make it with integrity and honesty along the way? And so many people appreciate your willingness and eagerness to learn. I mean, that's the meta skill that any company and manager would appreciate and value so much, is being willing to admit what you don't know and have a plan for that growth. You can even create your learning or your growth plan through the pivot method. So what do you actually need to learn? Keeping in mind that there might be a point of diminishing returns. If you're just not good at coding, maybe don't take the coding role. And maybe it's diminishing returns on your energy, on your time, on your life force, because there are going to be certain skills that you feel that you should develop, but you don't want to, or you're not that good at them. And when we look at those 3 E's of the pilot, you don't enjoy them, you don't want to become better at them, and you don't want to expand that part of your role or your career or your job. In which case, I would look to make a change or tweak in some way. And then, second, in terms of going for opportunities and what if you don't feel qualified? Be honest, be direct about your own self-assessment of where you're at relative to the role. Talk about how you're excited to grow, but don't count yourself out before you give others a chance to consider you. So, for example, with both of my books, I have 2 books now. I was so afraid that I didn't even open the Word file with my first book for over 6 months. It was just, I felt like it was dying on the vine in my computer. And then at a certain point, I realized, you know what? Let me send it to all the big publishing houses. And until every single one of them rejects me, then I'll self-publish. So I'm still going to get my book out to the world, but I'm at least going to give these publishers a chance to consider it. And if they all reject me, that's my answer. When I was in high school, I applied to a bunch of colleges on the East Coast in universities. I didn't get into any one of them. There was one school on the East Coast that I got into, and I ended up going to UCLA, which I was so thankful. I loved my experience at UCLA. Go Bruins. I even made my book Bruin Colors. But that was like, in a way, it was my backup plan, not because UCLA is a great school. I just didn't want to stay in California. I really wanted to go to New York or be on the East Coast. And sure enough, I finally made my way here in 2011, but I graduated in 2005. I just hadn't planned on staying in California. So sometimes it's like you got to just go for it, and then you see where it's like you roll the dice, or you throw your hat into the ring, and then let things fall where they may. And I always I'm open to however it turns out, and I always just kind of look for the best. So many people that I've interviewed have said that rejection or even getting fired ends up being a huge blessing in disguise. So it doesn't always feel like that in the moment. Even like Scott's story, leaving what seems to be the perfect on paper job. I don't know if I've ever spoken to somebody that says they actually regret it. They always just keep moving and seeing it as another path in their pivot journey, another stepping stone in their pivot path.
Great, Jenny. We maybe have time for one more question.
Sure.
And this one is just, do you have advice for people who've experienced burnout but don't have the financial resources to pay for another degree or more schooling?
Well, there's your answer already. If you feel burnout and you don't have the resources, don't worry about it. There's so much that you can do. I mean, now with what's going on with the pandemic, so much content and so much education is moving online and is so accessible to all of us. There's a lot you can do. So I always like to look for, where am I engaging if this, then that thinking, or if then thinking? Only if I get an advanced degree, then I can have the type of job that I want. There may be a very small percentage of jobs where that's actually the case, but I encourage you to think about, what are other creative ways I could prepare for a job of that type? And sometimes we assume that it requires, I mean, again, there are going to be certain companies and certain roles that say master's degree required. But barring that, allow yourself to be open about the type of role. The more flexible you are about what you're looking for, I just wouldn't assume that you need a master's degree. I considered going to business school. I bought all the GMAT books twice, 2 times in my life. I've bought GMAT books to apply to business school, and I couldn't talk about repulsion, a magnet working the opposite way. I never opened a single one of the books. I spent a lot of money. Those books are not cheap, and they take up a lot of space. And both times, this was about 10 years apart, couldn't touch them. I started a master's at Union Theological Seminary in 2018. And that was what I call put yourself in the path of pivot. I'm very interested in the intersection of faith and work, or those who describe themselves as spiritual, not religious, and how does that relate to the work we feel called to do. I started the degree, but then my business started really picking up. So I didn't finish it. I went on leave, and it was really hard to walk away. And especially for me, I have my parents in my head from when I'm a kid, like, you got to finish what you started. It just wouldn't work at the time. Talk about burnout. There was no way I could have kept my business running, gone to all my speaking engagements while missing classes, and just wasn't going to work. So sometimes your burnout, your energy is the indicator. Okay, you can go a different way. And I'll come back to that mantra, let it be easy, let it be fun. Sometimes when I feel burnt out, stuck, just don't have that feeling of forward movement, of more momentum, I pause and I say, how can I let this be easy? Let it be fun. What might that look like?
Jenny, thank you so much. A lot of really good insight here. We'll just encourage everyone, the recording will be available. We'll email that out tomorrow. And definitely a lot of those reflection questions I think are great for people to go through kind of in their own time and really use that to help as they kind of plan for their pivot step. So yeah, Jenny, thank you so much. And all of the people listening, you can definitely check out upcoming webinars and some of our past recordings as well on the webinar sites too. So thank you, Jenny.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Zach. And huge thanks to everybody who's here watching live and those of you who watch the recording. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks again, everyone.